Hey everybody, this is Petey from the Spinner Rack, and today I'm calling you on, it's a sad day. It's a sad day for me because I finally, I'm quickly trying to get to the content of today. I guess I have to keep it like this. Ready, set. All right, so you're seeing this right. This is an old story that's been out that really caught traction but didn't catch traction in the right way, right? It caught traction in saying, hey, he said these things, he had to feed his kids, wasn't interested in Thor, and I'm here to say it's a million times worse than what's here in the variety. So as I looked, and of course, they said they had the Smartless podcast. So I'd never heard of the Smartless podcast. So I thought maybe I should listen to it and let's see what's going on. Because I wanted to just do, if he didn't like Thor, why don't we do a page one rewrite? If we do a page one rewrite, how do we get from Ragnarok, Infinity War, Endgame, Love and Thunder? How do we get to that? And how do we reorganize the whole thing, right? So I'm going to get into some of the background of Ragnarok because I've talked about it a bunch of times, but I've never done anything really on it, right? So I guess I'm going to talk to you about the pieces, but why? Because of the things that he said here. So let's get out of this. Where am I at? I can do multiple shares. I don't know about this. I want to get out of the share. So stop share. All right. So despite the technical difficulties, let's go to this Smartless podcast. All right. Okay. So I want to give you the tone. So we're going to listen to a little of this. I should have done this with the crew, but I'm talking about doing a page one rewrite, so let's see what happens. Right, so where am I? There we go. All right, so let's listen.
Yeah, what made you think that Marvel is so incredible at doing their thing? I mean, they've got a product that is just incredible. It has made this industry as twice as healthy as it's ever been. But I think one should and does and needs to adhere to a certain parameters.
So let's get through that. They do some jokes here.
Question, to be honest. Still reeling from that question. I thought I'd get such a hard-hitting
so late, too, to be so articulate.
I have another one.
Hey.
I
didn't even answer that question. Straight to the next one. To watch you suck Marvel's dick for so long.
So I just wanted you to get the tone of the nature of this.
Took it all. Did you say take it all?
You did take it all.
Yeah, right down to the cubes. Let's get the answer now.
Okay.
Oh my God. Jason watches gay porn in his free time.
Fuck it.
What happened to me? You know what? I had no interest in doing one of those films. It wasn't on my my whole plan of my career as an auteur. But I was
as an auteur,
and I just had a second child, and I thought, you know what? This would be a great opportunity to feed these children.
Or do what my dad did. Go ahead, continue.
But, okay, well, I'm still doing my answer.
Sorry. No.
Yeah. Quiet, John.
Hang on. Okay, so then they called and they said, do you want to do this? And Thor was probably, let's face it, was probably like the least popular franchise. It was I had never read Thor comics when I was a kid. That was the comic I picked up and thought, Sure. And then I thought, and then I did some research on it, and I read a full one Thor comic.
Yeah.
or 18 pages of how long they are.
Sure.
I was still baffled by this character, and I thought, well, if there's anything I can bring to this.
Let's be honest. When it comes to comics, I mean, red is a stretch. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I am really struggling with Will Arnett.
Okay.
I flipped through that. Yeah, that's enough.
Put in the background, I could.
And then pitched myself. I thought the only thing that I could bring was as character. Is like just looking at Thor as a character, and he's like a billionaire, lives in space, and he looks ridiculous, and that was sort of the end. It was like, let's just highlight that. He's like a rich kid who, I pitched that he's a bit like you and me, Jason, that he hates germs,
right?
And
that didn't scare the shit out of them.
I think there was no place left to go with that.
Everyone attacked.
Right. I thought, wow, they called me, and this was really the bottom of the barrel.
But Feige has taken a nice swings on. Actually,
he has taken great swings.
Right. I mean, starting with Favreau, right, and then and Kenneth Branagh, and
Jason Bateman's trying to save it.
And
the Russos.
The Russos.
Look at this.
They're
just saving it.
Directors that have been outside of the box.
While the torching is happening.
But they know what they're good at, right? They're good at keeping everyone in their lane and making sure they don't veer off into to something else that doesn't feel Marvel. So they bring people in who are good at story and making great characters and bring something unique, and then they'll keep it within the Marvel.
Right. And you obviously had a great experience because you went back for one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but it is true. Like I remember, we have friends of ours who are doing another one of these. I won't name it, but it's a series of movies that takes place in space, and they went off a little bit. I think veered a little bit off. No. I didn't say it was Marvel. I said it's a different. It's their prop.
The fans hated it, by the way. They hated that I was doing.
They hated Thor?
No, the fact that I was doing when I signed on to that first one. And they're like, who's this guy? He's gonna
but they fucking end up loving it. My kids who are big Marvel fans, like my son Abel, still to this day, when I told him that you were on the show tonight, he was like, wait, he's on the show tonight? Because he loves fucking Thor so much.
He's an idiot, though.
He's not an idiot. He's a funny fucking kid. He's not a dullard like you.
Wait, Taika.
You get a compliment of Archie. You got
when you hear
this
that about
this is the 7 o'clock version.
We're getting grouchy. Bateman's 45 minutes past gummy hour. And it's not
starting to shake.
He's got the fight. It's not pleasant. Amanda won't let him in. Amanda's minutes later, you can come in the house.
She leaves it on the front step.
See, I'm not amused. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of none of this. Now, these guys, sometimes they're okay.
The kick in, and then it's just a scratch at the door. Not a bang at the door. It's just like.
All right.
Taika, when you hear that fans, like you said,
it made me happy.
Okay, next question.
Almost did a legitimate spit.
Okay, right? And then I have to ask about Mandalorian because I'm a massive fan.
All right, so we did it. We got through this godforsaken podcast. I'm sorry. I'm a fan of less so. I guess I'm a fan of Jason Bateman. I guess I don't have a problem with these guys. They're doing a podcast. This is kind of podcast fair. So I mean, I'm gonna say some stuff. So he said he just read one, and somehow we got Thor Ragnarok. So I don't know what to say. This is worse than I thought it was gonna be. It's way worse. It's way worse than what I thought it was going to be. So, oh Lord, I had some other things to show you guys. So let's try to go to that. All right. So, now that we're here, I'm going to show you some more stuff. Actually, I'm going to go to the Thor arc, right? This is the Taika Waititi arc, right? And we start with the Thor scene with Surtur, right? Have Surtur and he was a part of a major Ragnarok storyline with Walter Simonson. Now, you guys want me to bring up these artist editions? Ultimately, let me say this, right? There were two comics that I was loosely a fan of. One being Thor, because I saw him in, what am I doing here? I'm an X-Men, I'm a big X-Men fan, I'm a big Spider-Man fan. Those, and as a kid, Batman, those were like my favorite comic books, right? Did have some Supermans, but you start as a kid, Superman, because I think that's probably the first my mother bought. Then Batman really took over because Batman also had a TV show. Then so Spider-Man on Electric Company. So I wanted all Spider-Man, Spidey Super Stories. And then the X-Men just blew everything away. But I read the origin of Marvel Comics and I was wowed by the Fantastic Four in there. I was wowed by the Hulk. I was wowed by Thor, like Doctor Strange. All these characters seemed cool. They just seemed like they had just a ton of brilliant characters, right? So I liked the first Thor story and the latest Thor story, and I connected with Balder the Brave. Balder had a crush on Sif, but Sif was in love with Thor. So we had a love triangle, and I've been in those situations in the past and that sort of thing. So it was really interesting. In Thor and the Fantastic Four in the 70s were kind of had some of the greatest talents, and they went kind of dull, right? So of course we know Byrne got on the Fantastic Four. Even though the book was always selling, it started becoming the number 2 book. X-Men had become number 1. Thor at the same time was out on his last legs. You had Jim Shooter writing issues. I think Doug Mensch did the last arc, and then everyone was just like, people were running in and out of the door writing Thor comic books. It wasn't going anywhere. Now, Jim Shooter takes credit for Walter Simonson, but at the same time, it was Mark Grunwald who met with Walter Simonson. Walter Simonson said he wanted to take over the title, and Mark Grunwald was like, hey, you can do whatever you want. We got a list of things you could do, but basically you have carte blanche, right? So he had the idea of someone else picking up the hammer, which was something he had an idea, but he saw it on the list, right? So he came with an idea, and I think Jim Shooter said he used one of those ideas. Yes, so, but the tone and the take he did on Thor, he didn't go totally Victorian. He did his own style and he added Thor's humor. So that's what you can kind of see in the Thor movies with that humor, but he kind of keeps leaning towards Hercules, right? So the kind of Hercules and all of those different adventures and whatnot. So this Ragnarok kind of goes right towards that. But one of the early story subplots was the Surtur Saga. And this would be the actual Ragnarok, that the Odin sword would be taken and put into the eternal flame. Notice the thing there, and then that would cause Ragnarok. Ragnarok not meaning that Asgard would be destroyed. The so-called 9 realms would be destroyed. Everything would be destroyed. Ragnarok. That would be the real Ragnarok, right? And we know this is how Thor meets his end at Ragnarok. So we have this title called Ragnarok, right? Now, I'm pretty sure Stan Lee and Jack Kirby might have done 2 Ragnaroks. They might have done, Roy Thomas might have done his own. I think he did the Midgard Serpent, who is Thor's, in the Norse myths outside of Loki, Thor's natural enemy that he's going to meet, and he's going to lose his life defending Asgard, right? So Walter Simonson did his thing, and then we have here, and this is the problem with sometimes doing these Marvel movies, is that they take 5 and 6 storyline and they shove it in there, because you take a comic book storyline, one of the things is that what they're saying is why these movies can always translate into becoming a movie, is to say, I take any of these books, right? I take the Silver Surfer, right? What's missing to make this a movie? It's missing a subplot, these 3 and 4th side plots that kind of carry a movie through. So you can go in different directions, the whole hero's journey, that sort of thing. sort of how the arc happens in what's in the Simpsons episode. But you have to remember that you're trying to, most of these things are really straightforward, right? Maybe this one could be more of a movie. There's a lot of elements to this plot. But ultimately, in the comic book story, outside of some subplots, it's kind of hard to keep your, they have some, and that's why if you're doing a movie, the Suture Saga is huge. So that's like at least 2 stories, because it was like a subplot for maybe 6 issues, and then it becomes the main plot, which they use bits of it in the second, The Dark World. So, but you have this character that can be at least 2 movies, and he's like the beginning and the end, right? So we put like 4 or 5 movies in there. I'll show you brief clips from the comic books, because he said, who would read these comic books? Well, obviously Marvel or whoever wrote this read some comic books, right? So we had Surtur. Let's go to the next. We have, this could be the Midgard Serpent, but let's say is Fafnir. Like there's a dragon that Thor fought, and no, Fafnir is smaller than this. So this is more like the Midgard Serpent. So what can I say? They kind of use this. This get taken out by the Bifrost. So that this is the other Ragnarok story. So the Ragnarok, Simonson did 2 Ragnarok story, right? So we had the Surtur Saga, and we got slipped into this dragon. But this is just like any old dragon. But it kind of takes away, if you actually did the Midgard Serpent, then you're like, wait, what is this? He just beat a dragon. All he uses the bit force, right? So in the Surtur Saga, we lose Odin, right? So we kind of lose Odin. So that happens in the Surtur Saga. So that's like the first, 10 minutes. So that all these elements that are in the comic books are in this Thor movie, right? And Thor, Odin, and Loki being together at this point, and when they lose their father, right? But it's a little more dramatic when Simonson did it. This is more movie poignant, like a nice quiet moment, right? And then we have Hela, right? Now Hela has kind of lost her thing because half of her face kind of should be decayed, but they're kind of covering her eye here, but her face is not messed up. So they kind of threw out all of Hela's stuff for this whole thing of Hela and Odin being these warriors, and she's coming back for pain. This is the standard Marvel, not Marvel, but movies, whenever they do these things, like they kind of do the Wrath of Khan, where a character comes back for revenge, right? But in this point, Thor loses his hammer, right? So Thor loses his hammer, and that keys into a storyline where Thor loses his hammer when he becomes a frog, right? So kind of the arc here, where Thor goes to another world and has to become the big fighter for this. Well, he's actually getting some troops so he can fight Hela, right? So this kind of creeps into the Planet Hulk storyline, but it's kind of the same thing where Thor decides that he comes. It's hard to say, but I'll get to that later. But it kind of takes from this arc here, even though it's a lot more Planet Hulk. The whole arc is kind of this journey that Thor goes through when he loses his hammer in the Simonson saga, right? And I think I missed. Here, this is Loki. He's playing Loki, playing Odin, and Thor. There's another bit from Simonson where Thor throws his hammer and says the hammer has to come back. So that's another Simonson bit that's there. You got them with their father. They lose their father. Hela. We're going to show Hela doing something later, right? Now, forget the Furnace which is another. Now they don't play up that Hela and this dog here are children of Loki. And it kind of sets up this, they're in hell. Odin puts them in hell, and then they, I think, are part of well, at least the Midgard serpent, who's another child of Loki, come, and they're part of Ragnarok, right? And we have the Eternal Flame. This is in the comics. Actually, in the Thor, what was it? Taking the Odin sword out would become Ragnarok would start, right? But Simonson added that if you take the sword, Odin's sword was gone, I think. So he created a new sword that lights the. If he touches his sword into this eternal flame, that will light the whole thing, right? Which they did. Now, I just put this helmet here because they already did Thor in a helmet with wings, and they did it a lot better. But it was more like a festive helmet, right? World War Hulk. So we're just going to showcase that. So we have a ton of comic book stuff. So saying just read one, and somehow we got this, no, right? But people like to say pick themselves higher than the products that they're doing. So they're like, hey, I read one comic and I thought I could make him a rich kid type of deal. And Thor and Hulk has fought a bunch of times. But this is one thing where they say Taika Waititi, he fixed it. He had it where you couldn't calm down the Hulk. Now, not calming down the Hulk, this is like, even though, this lullaby thing, this is going to the classic, like how Lean Wen, if the Hulk was talked down by a friend, he wouldn't fight. Even Thunderbolt Ross was able to talk the Hulk down, and he became a friend, and Hulk was helping him out, and Hulk almost died trying to save his new friend Thunderbolt Ross. So saying that we fixed this can't be calmed down by a lullaby, it goes to the same comic book stuff that Hulk, when there's a friend around, he will calm down and he will stop. Even though it could be a setup to him getting punched in the face, he is more important to having a friend. And that's what kind of connected. That's what you see Lou Ferrigno doing, right? If they had a one where, was it Mr. McGee, he actually sees the Hulk and he gets to see the Hulk not as a monster. The Hulk saves the day and they're together, and then he calms down and he's like, hey, Hulk isn't, what's going on? Calm down. The Hulk calmed down and he's sitting there. He's like, you look kind of funny. And then something goes off, and then the Hulk, of course, runs. But there's an almost moment where the Bruce Banner almost changed back in front of Mr. McGee, right? Now, Hela is just hella hot. So they kind of changed the whole stuff here. But she ultimately, there's a storyline where after the Suture saga, Thor decides he's going to lead a whole troop to go to hell to free the souls and possibly send them off to Valhalla or something, like all the souls that are stuck in hell that are being punished during this fight. So he went there, and of course he's injured, right? But then this is where Thor kind of goes and gets a team, which is similar to another story I'm not going to tell you about. And Hela, in the comic book, she needs her mask, right? When she takes off the mask, she starts decaying, right? So it's kind of portioned to her. And this is kind of what Simonson kind of played to, right? And this, Hela injures Thor here. Now, he injures his eye, so it kind of throwback to Odin losing his eye. But in this comic books, she injures his face. That's why he gets the beard, the classic beard, because she injures his face beyond recognition. And he still leads the team, even though he's lost his face. He's not a superficial character. Obviously, I think that's Fenris. Here's him injured again. And this whole arc here is like saying, hey, you're not just the god of thunder and god of hammers. You are something with that. Now, Thor already figured this out in this other storyline that I can't get to yet because it's going to be too ridiculous to bring up during this portion, right? This is a portion of the story where they go to hell and fight off, what's the name, and the Executioner, who's obviously been a villain who has never taken the high road, finally takes the high road and fights, defends, keeps the Hela's armies from attacking while Thor and the rest of the souls escape, right? And then we have Ragnarok, but it's treated like Asgard is a world. So when Ragnarok happens, it actually just happens on Asgard. They lose Asgard, they come to Earth. So it's kind of loses the point of trying to avert Ragnarok and everything starting over again, right? So, but we get to the Avengers, and the Avengers ultimately, that gets into my other things. So I can't get into other things yet, right? But that would be trying to do a page on rewrite. Sorry. Let's get out of this, right? So now that we've done that, we only got one last thing to do, right? And that is so as I explained to you, stuff that's in the movie is in the comic book, right? You have Surtur. This is him being played up to the hilt, right? And he's got it so with him holding the sword, Odin can't become a mighty warrior like his brothers before him. He's been stunted by Surtur, right? So it's a lot of elements to this storyline. But this was supposed to be the only storyline he was going to do, and he wound up doing a good 3 to 4 years on Thor, which was very strong, a very great run, right? So that's one thing that could have been like at least two movies. At least two movies of setup, which the Dark World should have been a setup, and then we got to Surtur, and then we could have done something separately, right? So there's an aspect here where Thor uses his hammer, holds Loki up, and throws his hammer and says, take this away from me, or take this spell off of me, or you won't be able to fix yourself that easily, because obviously you can't really kill Loki, but at the same time, Thor was going to leave him in a bad way. So that was used here. That's already showed you the dragon, right? So we have the Midgard serpent, which is Thor's, his worst enemy, and it's also Loki's kid, who they don't play up. So, and then here's Thor with his injured face. He leads his troops through hell with his goats, and they use the goats, but more for humor. But hey, we got them nonetheless, right? And they don't run on the power of Mjolnir. They already are cosmic goats. So if you can't buy into cosmic goats, I don't know what's there for you. You can watch my video. I watch it. There you see another scene that you've seen in the what's the name, but instead of his eye, Thor's face is messed up, and you see the execution, right? So that's the storyline we're going to tell you about. But we have Planet Hulk, right, which they kind of got the look, but that Planet Hulk leads into World War Hulk. So they kind of cut themselves off, where if you wanted to do a Planet Hulk into World War Hulk, you can't really do it because there's no real reason, unless you try to develop this guy, the Illuminati, which they keep playing around with. And then we have Thor. This isn't that same story, but this is her looking for Odin's soul, right? So it's kind of similar. When Odin dies, we have her come in. So see, that's like 4 or 5 storylines. Now the arc that goes into this, that the whole arc of this Thor story is about, is that Thor is turned into a frog without the hammer. He loses his hammer. He then goes and he's kind of stuck, right? So then he meets up with his frog, and he helps out this frog, and the frog said, you need to come back. So they go to Central Park, and then Thor leads this troop because the frogs are struggling with the rats, right? And Thor is about bigger, as a frog is bigger than the rats and all other. So he becomes their kind of champion. He leads them in a fight against the rats, but he's still in a dilemma, stuck as that. So he leaves, he says he can't stay. So this is the other part. Simonson played up that Thor is the leader. He leads against Surtur. He leads with the frogs. He leads troops. So he's a leader amongst men. He's like this person that kind of builds up, and he kind of dealt with it a little bit in Endgame, where you saw him that it was a presence, right? So Thor has this moment, right? So you saw the moment in what's the name where he says, "Are you the god of hammers or you god of what's the name?" That moment was done in a humorous way in this issue. No, it was an issue before where Thor is like, I got to figure a way to get to Asgard to deal with Loki, because I know Loki's a part of this, right? So Thor comes over, and then his goats say, "Ah, the frog returns." And then he said, then Thor turns to his ghosts and says, he said, it was a tooth grinder, tooth gnasher. Said, "You recognize me? Of course, we would recognize you anyway." And he's like, "Well, I'm kind of stuck. I'm stuck as a frog." He said, "Well," he said, the hammer says whoever is worthy." And he said, "Oh, I didn't think about that." So it's just a funny sort of exchange because Thor understands the language of the animals now, the universal language, and then he picks it up and becomes the mighty Thor with the frog. So that could have been its own animated thing. I'm not asking for Marvel to do that, but that should have been its own animated story because it's just so much fun, right? So that's the first part of the rewrite. And anything else? But what I don't have here is, if you see the armor, I know I should have took a picture of it, but I didn't. Let's get out of this. Sorry. So my page, so I already said, since he didn't like it, I don't know. So I think I should kind of end here. He didn't like it, so ultimately you don't need to be vested in what he did because he kind of took like 4 or 5 stories and shoved it into one. Now I understand, even though the Satur saga has a lot of subplots, so that could have been made to 1 or 2 movies. Some of these other storylines, like Hela's Curse, and that's what I wanted to delve into because obviously people like Love and Thunder didn't work. Now, sad to say that I can't figure out how to make this into a love story, but if we go back to here, one thing that could have been interesting, if at the end, instead of just losing an eye, if Hela left Thor with a curse, right? Then in the Simonson comic books, Hela left Thor not only injured, but he left him with a curse where he couldn't die, but he had brittle bones. So while he's doing this stuff here, he slowly would start to get injured. And that would lead us into Endgame in a good way. So he does all this stuff, maybe he gets injured, he breaks his arm or something like that. And then he still comes in here fighting. It would build up the heroism that's in Thor, right? And then I think what happened. So I'm not getting into him coming back here and killing, but one of the aspects of when Thor had this curse, he kept going even though he kept getting more and more hurt, right? So that would have been interesting to have him not at 100%. And then when you get into Love and Thunder and or Endgame, you're not, let's see, the Endgame shots here. Okay, so in Endgame, you have Fat Thor. Instead of having Fat Thor, since I'm doing a loose rewrite, having Thor being with this curse where he's not here drinking beers and getting fat, but they know that he's lost a step and they're not sure why, and he doesn't know why, and his face is also injured, and he's in this bad way, right? Instead of just replacing the eye with no problem, right? So when you get to this Love and Thunder, right, instead of having him just bulk back up, this is the arc of the story, that all this stuff is happening. We have the God Butcherer, we have Thor that's missed a step. Sorry, we have to get rid of Jane Foster. I never was with Captain America holding the shield and someone else having the shield. Thor is the worthy one. No, as Simonson said, no one on Earth should be able to pick up the hammer, right? So, but we had the God Butcherer, this person who can kill gods, right? We finally got the goats, so that was probably the best part of it, right? We had the God Butcherer, right? But if we have this arc where we have Thor who can't die, and he's fighting against this guy who's the God Butcherer, you can have your asshole where they have this final showdown, and the Butcherer can't kill Thor. He can turn him into powder, but he can't kill Thor. And that leaves you this hook to how you can, and that's what Simonson did. He had this part where Thor couldn't die, and he was fighting the robot that was in the. I'm talking to you, the audience. What's a robot in Thor movie? Destroyer. So we had the Destroyer, who was strong, very tough enough to kill gods, tough enough to kill Thor, right? So Thor is supposed to meet his end against the Midgard serpent, and he destroys the Midgard serpent, but at the same time he merges with his hammer, and that turns him into paste, right? So all he is a thing of jelly. So the Destroyer comes and finds a foe he can't destroy. This is the only person that he can't destroy. But Thor is not alive, so then he doesn't know who it's Thor because in a different outfit. So the Destroyer is able to go in because he goes into people's, he can somehow he's able to go into people's consciousness, and he goes in and he realizes Thor, and he knows Thor can defeat him in the thing of the minds, and Thor takes over the Destroyer's body. And that leads them into this big fight. So if you have this where they'd have to meet on a plane where they mentally have to fight, that possibly could have been a better ending where he's fighting this guy and he can't kill Thor. He's met the enemy that he can definitely just have destroy him if they've already killed you already. When they meet on this other plane, less like they met with who was it? Eternity, they could have had something more interesting. So it was a million times worse than I thought. It was way worse. I'm sorry. There's not much I can say. So, and that's some of the things you could have done in the other movies instead of doing Fat Thor. And I'm not even talking about the fat shaming. I'm just saying it just didn't amount to anything. Thor has this moment in Ragnarok where he becomes whole, and then next thing you know, that's taken away because everything they lose, and he becomes the weakest of the crew. And he becomes Fat Thor. So, but that's not Taika Waititi's problem because he didn't create Fat Thor. He slimmed him down. He did him as a fake Viking, or he's the rich guy in the cosmos. So I don't know. I don't know where that shows up in the movies, but I guess it's supposed to be a spoiled rich kid or something like that. So, sad to hear. Someone took the low road and decided to say, hey, let's get on this podcast and let's tear apart these characters. So, more power to them. It's so sad. It's so sad when you sit around here and you just decide, you know what? These comic books aren't really worth the paper they're printed on. And that's an old school thing that comes from the McCarthy era where people were kind of guilted out of comic books. And I'm saying you don't have to keep reading comic books for the rest of your life. You don't have to be like some of us, like me. But at the same time, you move on. Like I moved on. I complain about the X-Men all the time. I've moved on from them somewhat. I'm still reading the old comic books. But some point you have to move on from stuff you don't like. And if it's a kid's thing, you don't want to just turn and say, hey, you still watching that Winnie the Pooh? Like, it's just like, come on. And you see people can still read the juvenile fiction and not feel like they're bashing their head in type of deal. So I don't know. These end parts is kind of go on, a strange way because it's kind of tough to kind of hear that stuff. But anyway, no more power to Taika Waititi. Sad that he said that. Sad that he didn't kind of showcase the kind of work that he was doing, because even God Butcherer, that comes from comic books. The Jane Foster being Thor, that comes from comic books. And Thor meeting Hercules or going against Zeus, all that stuff is in the Marvel comic books. It's not in the lore. So it had to come from somewhere, right? So I guess that's about it. Spin rack out.